Welcome to Unit 1, Video E. So in this unit, we're going to talk about regulating employee benefits. So there are about 15 statutes to cover in this unit, and so some will be covered in more detail than others. Some will be left up to your imagination because they're fairly boring, but others are really interesting and really important to employee benefits, and we must go over them. Without getting too technical, when you think about the employment relationship, it's essentially an agreement or kind of a contract. I hate to call it contract because it's not really a contract, but it's really contractual, I guess. And so Congress tries not to interfere with that freedom to contract. However, it really starts to get involved when employees are not positioned to be treated fairly or equitably. So take a moment and answer this question. So some people argue that there's too much government regulation of employment, while others say there is not enough. Do you think there is too little or too much government regulation? And go ahead and mark your cursor where you think it is. There's no right or wrong answer. I guess some of it, I asked this question one year and one student says, that's a very political question, Dr. Parson. And so I just want you to answer it the way you think, particularly as it relates to the employee-employer relationship. All right, regulation is a bit of a balancing act. I mean, some of us think there's too much, some of us think there's too little, but really there's a balancing act that takes place. So how much do we want or need the government involved is really the overarching question. And as a general rule, Congress should pass laws that it believes the employee to be at an unequal footing with the employer. All right, so I want to jump into talking about some of these laws. And the first set of laws that I'm going to deal with are primarily around employment and employment discrimination. And so I want to introduce you to three fantastic superheroes. We've got Title VII, the ADA, and the ADEA. And so this is Title VII. Her job is to protect against discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, religion, pregnancy status, and in some states, and actually as of recently in the US now, her powers have been transformed to protect against LGBTQ plus discrimination. So I want to go real technical with you real quick because I did tell you I was an EEOC investigator, which is over Title VII. So the Equal Opportunity Commission oversees several statutes, one of them being Title VII, which is Civil Rights Act of 1964. And essentially, what that statute sets up is says, hey, if you've been discriminated against on any of these bases, what you have to do is go through the EEOC process, which is a administrative law process to determine whether or not there's enough evidence to substantiate your claim of discrimination. And so when you feel like you've been discriminated against on the basis of one of these protected classes that we're going to talk about when we talk about the big three, you file a charge of discrimination with the EEOC, and then that charge is investigated. They require a response by the company to respond to each and every one of the allegations that you make. And essentially, these laws are very employer friendly because the burden of proof is beyond or preponderance of the evidence, meaning is it more likely than not? Is it more likely than not that discrimination took place or the opposite? And so what an employer has to prove is legitimate non-discriminatory reasons for why the decisions were made the way they were made. So if, for example, there's a particular benefit that's offered to a certain class of employees, the employee who feels like they or discriminated against on that basis would have to show that the employer, had some sort of intent behind their discriminatory act. And so an employer could come back and use seniority, or went to a certain class of employees. And so it's a really difficult burden to penetrate through, but it is a source of review for employers and employee relationships. And so we see it used a lot, and most employers have had some sort of EEOC level claim at their doorstep. So the second superhero I want to tell you about is the ADEA, which is the Age Discrimination Employment Act. And this act and his job is to protect employees over the age of 40 from discrimination. So you can't fire someone because they're old. You can fire someone because they're not qualified or their technological skills are outdated and they're unable to, keep up with the pace of technology if that's something that's an essential function of the job that you have. That's the job of the ADEA superhero. And then we have the ADAAA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Acts Amended Act. So back in 2008, we had the ADA, but it got to be where these cases were going through the court system that it made it really difficult for an employee to get to even have the conversation about whether or not they were discriminated on the basis of their disability, because we spent so much time trying to define whether or not they had a qualifying disability. And so, like every other statute that we just talked about with Title VII and the ADEA, this has a particular group of folks that it protects. And it protects against disability discrimination, including things like a record of a disability. So again, in the employee benefits space, if there is a record of a disabling condition, again, that's where some of these other laws start to cross over, like HIPAA. But if you have a record of a disability, or you're regarded as having a disability, history of having a disability, and a disability is one or more is something that impacts one or more major life activities. So this can be eating, sleeping, walking, sitting, standing. It can also include thinking and concentrating and things that like our cognitive abilities. Or you're associated with a disabled person. You have a spouse or a child, for example. So particularly in the healthcare space, if I'm an employer offering employee benefits and I hire someone and I said, I like you, I really want to hire you, but I see that you have a child with cerebral palsy, that's going to be expensive because I'm a self-funded insurer, and I can't pay for that. And so we're going to exclude all of your dependents. Well, you can't do that unless you are doing that with all your employees. That's discrimination. And so that's one of the ways that the ADAAA comes into play in protecting employee benefits. Sometimes the ADAAA hangs out with my good friend, the FMLA, which is the Family Medical Leave Act. I thought I had a slide for the Family Medical Leave Act. But the Family Medical Leave Act is essentially an act that protects your job should you have a qualifying event or have a qualifying condition, and you need to take time away from work. It, covers up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave and allows you to return back to your position or a similarly situated position in the event of needing to be away from work for a long period of time. So I think I circle back around to Family Medical Leave Act. If not, we will definitely circle back around to it in our in-person conversation. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the National Labor Relations Act of 1935. In 1911, there were some really large fires in New York, and there were about 150 teenage girls that died because the exits were locked when the building caught on fire. So this really led to the first industrial code that we saw. And so in North Carolina, we have the Industrial Commission, as do other states that have that regulate, or as do other states. And the Industrial Commission's job is to regulate the code, so to speak, and to deal with the National Labor Relations Act as one of the acts that they deal with. So essentially, the National Labor Relations Act applies to private sector employers. And there's a host of individuals that the National Labor Relations Act does not apply to. But their job, the National Labor Relations Act then has a National Labor Relations Board that oversees the administration and regulation and upholding of this act. So it's an employee's right to work together to improve terms and conditions. So it is a protected, concerted activity, which is what the National Labor Relations Act essentially protects. So why is it relevant to employee benefits? Well, when we're talking about different types of benefits, there are mandatory benefits, there are permissive benefits, and then there are things that are illegal. So the type of benefit that we're talking about determines whether or not there's some sort of bargaining element that then throws it under the National Labor Relations Act. So if it's a mandatory benefit, then they must bargain if either side makes a proposal, such as like disability pay, health, and retirement plans. Permissive benefits don't require either side to enter into bargaining. So that can be like retiree benefits, workers' comp, administration of funds to the employee benefits, etc. And then there are things that can't be bargained over because of law. So ERISA really plays into this, and I don't talk a lot about ERISA, but Dr. Huff will in his class. And so when we think about ERISA has to deal with retirement, and there are just a ton of standards that make bargaining even illegal in those particular areas, such as retirement or welfare plans. All right, so let's talk about the Worker Adjustment Retraining Notification Act, the WARN Act. And this has become, again, another hot topic as of right now, but the NLRA folks were instrumental in the passage of the WARN Act. And what it does is it basically says that there has to be a 60-day notice for any mass layoff, whether that, and they define mass layoff as being, X amount of people at any one site or X amount of people or Y amount of people across your entire business. And so what you can do is you can look up, I think it's on the Department of Labor website, Nope, it's on the Department of Commerce website, and you can actually go in and see what companies have indicated that they're going to do mass layoffs. So we can take a look at the WARN notices for 2020, which is going to be a pretty long list here. So as you can see, it's listed by county here, and every state has this WARN list. And so when you read in the news or hear in the news of like mass layoffs, I always wonder, like, how do they know that that took place? Well, they're going to this list and finding out. And so you can see where all these different layoffs took place. And they're listing why they've been laid off. So a lot of COVID-19 related ones. So you can take a look at that list if you like. All right, and the whole premise for having the WARN Act is to make sure that there are adequate resources available should you do a mass layoff. So, and failing to make the proper notification under the WARN Act actually means a huge financial penalty. If you think about why an employer is laying off, it's usually because of some sort of financial crisis, outside of COVID. So, adding additional penalties on top of financial stressors is probably not a good idea. So definitely want to stay on top of that. So the Internal Revenue Code plays a big role in our employee benefits rules and administration and just options that we give employees. So the IRC is the code that regulates that. So I'm going to reference the IRC quite a bit, especially when we get to talking about something called cafeteria plans. And no, it doesn't have to do with food, but that's what they call the set of plans. And that has a lot of great tax implications for employees and employers. And then we got FICA and FUTA, which are all programs that most of you who have had jobs should be fairly familiar with. Essentially, FICA funds Social Security, old age survivor, and disability income, where FUTA funds unemployment insurance benefits. All right. So as I mentioned before, the IRC lists a number of codes that apply to employee benefits, and a lot of them have to do with offering something called discretionary benefits to employees, where employees can deduct the cost of the benefit, and employers can deduct the costs as well. There's a lot of ERISA provisions. There's some non-discrimination rules that really prevent some preferential treatment. But again, don't hold on to that too strongly. When we talk about cafeteria plans, we'll jump all into that. All right, so the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standard Act, is a set of laws that that deals with three major components of an employee's relationship with their employer. It sets a minimum wages, and it lays out the provisions for overtime and time and a half. And you have to work 40 hours or more to be eligible for time and a half. And you have to fit certain job categories in order to be eligible for overtime pay. And it also lays out some standards for child labor law.